Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. Each week, this webinar series features an extraordinary individual that provides valuable and impactful services, helping to transform the capabilities of their nonprofit clients. Join us as we explore a variety of topics, all vital to the success of nonprofit organizations. Learn and grow from the experience and expertise of our featured guests. Without further delay, let's introduce you to the host of the Nonprofit Edge podcast series, Chris Looney.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge podcast, where we explore the strategies, leadership lessons, and emerging issues shaping the future of nonprofit organizations and social impact work. Today's conversation focuses on fiduciary duty in the digital age and why nonprofit leaders must now think about cybersecurity, governance, operational resilience, and digital stewardship as part of their core responsibilities. And joining me today is Jeff Steadman from RSM. Jeff works closely with organizations on cybersecurity, on governance, on risk management, and digital operational strategy. And recently, Jeff and his partner led a Fulcrum member huddle on this topic that generated tremendous engagement and discussion because of how practical and relevant the conversation was for nonprofit leaders today. So, Jeff, welcome to the show. I'm certainly glad to have you with me.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for the invite, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, well, I am impressed by your own podcast and how many episodes that you've done, and it's in this realm. So if people wanted to check that out, can you share how people might access that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's called Identity at the Center, everywhere you get podcasts and on YouTube. If you go to the website, idacpodcast.com, that'll take you straight to it. And I actually run it as a 501c3 nonprofit. So I'm starting to get a little bit into this world.
Oh my gosh, lucky you. Well, if you need fundraising help, you know where to call. But we're glad for that 501c3. We're glad for the work that you do. And it was fascinating for me to learn about, the things that I haven't been hearing about how nonprofit leaders today need to take some ownership for a lot of the things that weren't a part of the conversation 20 years ago, or maybe should have been, but we're not. So I'm excited to, jump in, and let's start with a softball question for you, which is, when nonprofit leaders hear the phrase fiduciary duty, many still think primarily about budgets, audits, financial oversight, but that definition has clearly evolved. So how should nonprofit leaders define fiduciary duty in today's environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I like to simplify things for my feeble brain. It is still making sure that you've got the organization's best interests, to heart, right? And that you're protecting it, whether it's the assets, the mission, the brand, stakeholders, et cetera. Yes, it includes financials. Yes, it includes, like I said, assets. But we're a digital world now. You're accessing things through a whole bunch of different devices now. So if you're not thinking about data and data security, like you need to be, right? That is where your secret sauce is. I'm pretty sure none of us have like a ream full of paper where we're jotting everything down, right? Now everything's like an Office 365 file or a Google Workspace file, right? Things like that. So when you start thinking about how you protect that data, it starts, in my mind, with identity and access management. Are you sure that the right people have the right access to the right data at the right time?
Amazing. Yeah. Why is digital security now directly tied to financial stewardship?
Yeah, we live in a world of unfortunately ransomware. So bad guys are always trying to get in. They're trying to steal data, trying to take advantage of situations, and that's just the world we live in now. So it is becoming increasingly difficult to try to separate what is a real email versus maybe a fake email, right? Deep fakes now with AI or all this stuff, right? There's stuff like that. So that is probably the biggest part of it, is we are all at risk, right? If I get an email, to my podcast under the nonprofit, from a vendor that says I owe them money, am I going to click on that email when it might be a phishing attack trying to steal my credentials or to trick me to give away money? Or does it download some sort of, malware into my device, and all of a sudden my computers are locked up and I'm in the news for all the wrong reasons? So Ransomware is probably the biggest thing, but that's really just sort of like what people see. So,
Mm,
my day job, I do identity security consulting. So, one of the things that we typically see is, okay, well, what happens after you've been hit by ransomware?
right.
You have to recover. You have to do incident response. You have to figure out where the gaps were. You have to try to recover like the data that might be lost or missing or stolen. I hate to say it. Once the data's gone, it's gone. There is no honor amongst thieves. So they might say, Scott's honor, I'm going to delete the data once you pay me. You can't trust that. So you've got to be very careful with that. And then that impacts on the financial side too for cyber insurance premiums. So if you're an organization that has those, if you have good security controls around your data, there is an impact to your cybersecurity premiums. Or you may not even be able to get cybersecurity insurance if you do not have sort of a minimum threshold of security that might be looking for.
Yeah. Well, I know on the boards that I sit on, we're not really talking about this stuff. And yet it's so important. I imagine most executives in the past haven't really spent a lot of time until they're negatively impacted talking about this. But the responsibility now probably means that there is more advanced planning and preparation and whatnot. How has that responsibility of boards and executives changed over the years for you as you've seen it?
Yeah, I think there's been a recognition that, data security is important. Will it be as important as everything else going on? No. Like this is an equation that is constantly being rebalanced, right? And kind of whatever the urgent thing is of the day. But what I have seen is that there are more rules coming from a regulatory standpoint to make sure that people are compliant with financial obligations or, the obligations associated with being, a certain status, right? 501(c)(3. I have to maintain certain records, things like that. What I would say is that, and if you're in a situation, it's like, well, we have an IT person who just takes care of that. Great. But you should be asking them questions. Your fiduciary duty is to ask those questions and say, hey, what are we doing about this? And that person's job then becomes to convince you as a board member to say, okay, it sounds like we've got a good handle on that. Now, you probably want to vet it and validate it, right? And things like that. But you do not have to be the expert. There are plenty of experts out there. What you do need to be aware of is what are the questions you should be asking, and then try to suss out if the answers you're getting are good. Trust but verify is a way that we typically approach it. But it is governance. That is what your member, if you're a board member, is you're governing the organization. Are you doing a good job of governing? And that includes fiduciary duty, which means are you asking the right questions?
Yeah. What are the dangers of delegating that cybersecurity entirely to your IT person or team or outside vendors? Like, I don't help me understand what the danger is.
Well, delegation absolutely makes sense, but that does not resolve you or absolve you of any of the responsibility. You are still accountable for your organization. So
Okay.
if I go and I say, well, I've hired this person to take care of it, great. But if they fail, it is still me as the organization that is accountable for what has happened. So you do need to ask those questions. You do need to, exercise appropriate delegation, I would say. Some things are fine. Maybe there's, IT functions, maybe to some degree audit, right? Or along those lines. But it does not, you cannot abdicate your responsibility. You are
Yeah.
still responsible, still accountable, even though you might have said, I have hired so and so to take care of that task. And if an IT team goes off and implements a tool, they use some system to like review it, make sure things are monitored, et cetera. Like that's great. But you as the governor of that should also be looking to say, okay, where we don't have coverage, what about this type of scenario? Those sorts of things.
Yeah. I love how you said governor of that. Like, we only hear governor when we're thinking about states, but in reality, as a nonprofit leader or board member, we're a governor of something, right? So as a governor, if I'm on the board or if I lead an organization, what's an interesting question or two that I should be asking in this realm?
Well, the first thing is, do you have an inventory of all the things that you need to be tracking? So your assets, both physical and data, right? Do you know where your data is stored? Especially key data like financials, maybe donor information, right? Things like that that would be extremely counterproductive if they were not where they needed to be or have the appropriate security involved. I would start asking questions around when's the last time you went through an incident response test, right? What happens when something goes wrong? I think we're in a stage now where it's not a matter of if something happens, it will be when something happens. And so being able to sort of walk through a plan of, okay, let's say this thing happens. Let's say we go through a ransomware attack. Okay, what do we do? You do not want to be figuring that out in the middle of your screen's all locked up
Right.
and a nasty message saying, give us 1 million Bitcoin or your stuff is leaked. So those are questions to ask is like, do we know where our stuff is? And what happens when things go haywire? What do we do about it? And you don't have to start with like everything. Pick one or two things and say, okay, let's just walk through it. Tabletop exercise is what we would call it, you know, and then just kind of spiral from there.
Yeah, beautiful. That is so helpful. That is practical and that is helpful. So thank you for sharing that. Let's move on a minute to just the risks. And one of the most striking parts of the session from the Fulcrum Huddle was how real and immediate these risks are for organizations of all sizes, not just the big boys or girls, but the small shops, the medium-sized shops, all shops, because they're all living in the digital world. They're all living on the cloud. They're all living out there and accessible. What are the most common cyber threats nonprofit organizations are facing today?
Yeah, I would say the big three are ransomware for sure, right? That's the one that makes the headlines. You've got the ways that ransomware come in, then, which is business email compromise, which basically stands for, hey, Chris, I sent you an email and I got you somehow to click a
Click.
link that let me
Yeah,
install something, right? Or send me money.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the AI is getting better. Like it's no longer like a poorly worded, email from a prince somewhere that needs to get their money into the US. Now it is fully translated. It totally makes sense and lines up. The other one is, and this is something I don't think we talk enough about, is what I would call your supply chain. So vendors and third parties. We all have them. We don't do everything in house. And so think about who your vendors are and what your supply chain looks like, not just physical goods, but your IT goods as well, your IT services. If you've outsourced your IT functions to another area, they are part of your supply chain. What are they doing from a security standpoint? The most famous breach in this case is Target several years back, many years back at this point. Maybe I'm showing my age, but Target got breached because of a air conditioning contractor, HVAC. And it's like, okay, well, wait a second. What are we doing about our third parties? And so between
mm,
ransomware, business email compromise, and keeping an eye on your vendors and your third party breaches, those are typically the big ones that come through. So, phishing, et cetera, those sorts of things.
yeah, yeah. And why are nonprofits being targeted of all people?
Easy pickings, really. It's,
Yeah,
most nonprofits don't have huge budgets to spend money on a bunch of security measures, a bunch of staff to like keep an eye on this. And so, from a relativity standpoint, generally speaking, we find that a lot of nonprofits don't have as strong as security controls. There's a lot of people wearing multiple hats. And so maybe I'm, doing 8 different roles with an organization. And if my account were to get breached, instead of it being a very limited impact of just the role I'm doing, if I have a bunch of roles, now I've got a whole bunch of different access to things that I could do that could be, detrimental to the organization. So it is not a situation like if you're small, like you're safe. Like, no, 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 nobody's safe. What it is you need to have a certain level of maturity from a security standpoint to at least be a minimum level of safe. But it is not just a simple matter of just like, yeah, like people are ignoring it. It is most of these breaches are targets of opportunity. They are not targeted. There are absolutely targeted attacks. If you're a nonprofit that has, let's say you're in a specific sector or you deal with especially sensitive information around maybe your donors or the types of people that you serve, absolutely you're going to be a target. And you'll see those targets ebb and flow based on what's happening in the world, political reasons, geopolitical, whatever it might look like. But everyone is at risk here, and you need to be paying attention to it.
yeah. I think you did a good job of explaining ransomware and business email compromise. I'd be surprised if people are unaware of these strategies. My question, I guess, is what's the simplest way to prevent those, on the one hand? And if I was um, thinking I might have just compromised myself by clicking on something, what might I choose to do to mitigate the results or to help myself get out of a dangerous way?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think if
Yeah, I
I'm in the middle of,
apologize.
yeah, no, I'm thinking about it. So, let's take the scenario. You did click on a link and maybe it did something. And the first thing is trying to become aware of what did you just do? because a lot of times people don't know what they've done. It's a link to a URL that looks legit, but they're using different characters and it looks, like it's something there. So you kind of have to be that first line of defense. Okay, what am I clicking? Is the URL correct? Does this make sense? Et cetera. But once you've clicked it, the first thing you should probably do is change your password, like immediately, as fast as possible. And if you've reused that password anywhere else, you need to change all of those passwords as well.
And the password for that particular email?
hmm Yeah, that
Okay.
system, whatever it is, you logged into, the email itself. There's a lot of different things. What will happen typically is you'll have an account breach, and so you might have entered in your credentials into a fake website that is built to harvest people's accounts and password names and things like that, right? So now I have your account information. I can go now to a separate window and open up, hey, here's Chris in, bank, whatever it may be. So you want to change the password for that for sure. If you think you've clicked on something, like a PDF attachment or a Word document or something that
Right.
might have installed something in your machine, now it's listening and reporting back everything you're doing. Now we're talking a very crazy scenario. It's like, okay, well, what do I do about that? Disconnect the computer from the network if you can as fast as possible. Turn off the Wi-Fi, turn off the network connection, unplug it, those sorts of things. And try to separate it from as many things as you possibly can. That is probably the first part. You definitely want to start calling for help though. If you think you've installed something, run antivirus. There's a bunch of free tools online you could probably find that will help you scan for things. But really, it's about triage. How can
Okay.
I, contain the blast radius of what is about to happen?
That's right. That's good. I mean, that's just amazing. And so, um, this is how sort of small vulnerabilities become major organizational crises, right? I mean, the smallest thing leads to bigger things, right? And you've probably seen over and time again how these seemingly innocuous or relatively small intrusions become big things.
Yeah,
And
hackers aren't breaking in, they're logging in. Like that is
yeah,
the easiest way to do it is for me to steal someone's identity and log in. So I hate to be, not Hollywood enough, but this isn't like the Matrix where I'm sitting down and I'm like, I get to be cool and say, oh, I'm in, right? When they're doing that, is like they're literally logging in with, oh, I just logged in with Jeff's ID and password.
that's right. Which I was able to get by exploiting a vulnerability, right?
Yep.
And do you get the sense that smaller nonprofits are more vulnerable than larger ones?
I think it's a different type of vulnerability. A larger nonprofit probably has a higher headcount, which means there are more surfaces to protect. And so if you're a larger nonprofit with a bunch of, employees and partners and vendors and contractors and all that stuff, think
Yeah.
about each of those individual people that have access to your systems. They are each a point of entry into your house, so to speak. Smaller nonprofit may have fewer of those people, probably. So there are fewer points of entry, but those points of entry might be more significant because of the nature of wearing those multiple hats, right? I have a podcast. I'm also a founder. I'm also a member of the board. I also edit the podcast. I also run the website, right? So if my account were to get breached, not only would they have access to one role, they'd have access to many roles. And that might be a scenario where it might be a problem.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Well, let's jump into some of the audits, controls, and sort of organizational accountability. You shared an important point during the member huddle that many organization leaders may not fully realize that auditors are increasingly evaluating digital environments and internal controls through their work. And I guess why are auditors now paying much closer attention to cybersecurity and IT controls in their work?
Yeah, auditors are getting smarter. They know where the data is. They know where the risks are. That's their job is to find it, right? So where is your financial data? It's probably in a digital system, which means that there is some sort of access associated with it. And so the auditors are going to take a look at that and say, okay, well, can we trust the financial data that is in that system? And if we're not able to demonstrate the access controls are appropriate, that the data hasn't been tampered, have I switched a comma? Have I changed a number? Right? Things like that. Those are things that essentially make the books unusable, right? We cannot certify that these financial records are, correct in the way they should be. And so that's why they're looking at it. Is they're looking from a risk perspective. Is okay, well, where is the data? Nobody cares about the cafeteria menu, right? You might because we don't know what's for lunch, but you know when the breach comes in, they're not caring about that. They're trying to get to the stuff that's really important. And so the auditors are tending to focus on financial data. And so they want to make sure that you're following what we call the CIA triad in information security: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so
Mm.
confidentiality is, do the right people have access to this information?
Yeah, that's great. And how connected are digital systems to financial integrity today?
I mean, I don't think you can talk about one without the other, right? Because
Okay.
you're putting, into your QuickBooks, into your Ramp, right? All these services that we're tracking donor information, tracking payments, et cetera, they're all digital systems. They all have data residing somewhere that you need an access to get to. And so I don't think you can talk about one without really talking about the other. Again, unless you're really old school and you have like the big old ledger on your desk and I'm thinking back to my accounting days in high
Yeah.
school.
Right, right. No, 100%. And I'm sure many of us get concerned when we're asked by Stripe or something to connect that to our financial institution electronically, right? And that seems like a vulnerability because you're sharing password information online and across systems. But there's probably so many more vulnerable ways that you can share that password or information without realizing it. So auditors are able to kind of help you understand, and maybe that's what you do a lot of times too, is sort of test these vulnerabilities.
Yeah, we take a look at it. And I think, you bring up a good example, right? So let's take a scenario like Stripe, right? You need to take payments from your customers. And
Right.
I'm pretty sure none of us want to set up our own payment network and issue our own credit cards, right? And do all that stuff. So we
No.
rely
Yeah.
on our third-party vendors to do that.
Yeah.
Stripe would absolutely be one of those. And any vendor, right? It can be Stripe, it can be anyone else, right? The way they connect to your financials is important. If you ever come across a financial institution and they say, hey, let me connect to your bank, put in your ID and password here, that's a big no-no. I would absolutely flag that and say, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. What you're looking for is a more secure way of sharing information between your financial institutions. So you might be familiar with services like Plaid, who do like an account linking process kind of behind the scenes, and they securely transmit information. You might enter your credentials into Plaid and say, okay, I need to log into the bank that verified you. You'll run through, an identity verification process of some sort that the bank does to make sure that this transaction or this account connection is legitimate, and then you connect. But I would seriously question any, direct vendor, Stripe included, and they're big and they're well known, and I'm sure they have great security. But if any vendor is saying, "Hey, type in your ID and password here and trust us, we'll connect," I
Yeah.
would take a little bit closer look at that and make sure that it's legit.
Well, now I'm scared. Okay. Well, and
Well,
that's
good.
good.
My job is done here.
We want yeah, right, exactly. We want everybody to have a healthy level of fear and awareness and to not be burying our heads in the sand when it comes to this stuff. There's a threat around every corner and you need to be aware and just take the precautionary steps. And to your point, it's not a matter of if, but when and how that this happens and how well you're prepared for it, right? So I think it's all incredibly helpful. Are there other weaknesses or gaps that tend to surface most often through these audits and evaluations?
Yeah, I think access creep is another one that we call it. So, humans are really good at giving access to things and we're really bad at taking them away. And I see this quite a bit in smaller nonprofits, especially a scenario where you may have multiple job functions, right, or roles within the organization. So maybe I started as one role. I started as X, and now I've been promoted or I've been asked to take on another role, Y. We probably did a good job of giving me the X axis and the Y axis. And now I have both X and Y axis, right? Let's say I'm accounts payable and accounts receivable. That would be a big no-no, right? Something like that. So one of the things to think about is when somebody moves roles within the organization, especially for larger organizations, is the access appropriate for their new role? And this is not a problem that is specific to nonprofits. I see this all the time across every
Yeah,
industry. It
yeah.
is well known, well documented, and it is always a struggle for everybody. But take a look at what we call movers. So if I move from one role to another, my access should probably change to be commensurate with whatever that new role is. Maybe I don't
Right.
need access to, this other system anymore because that role doesn't have anything to do with it. Shut that access down. Remove that point of entry where if my account were to get breached, I had more access as needed. So access creep is a big one. And then straight up offboarding. When people leave the organization, shut down their accounts. Like
Yeah.
that is like one of
Right.
the basic things that you should be doing. The
Ah,
hard part is knowing all the things that people have access to because
right.
when we have all these different systems like that. So that's why the inventory is so important to say, okay, well, what are the systems that we use here? So that when Jeff leaves the organization because I, won Powerball and I bought an island somewhere and I'm going to live there. So what do you do about my access? You need an inventory to say, well, here's the 5, 10, 100 different systems that I had access to. Let's make sure that those things are turned off and that I don't still have access to it after I leave.
That's amazing. Well, when you were talking earlier about inventory, that was not one of the things that I was thinking about to inventory, the list of permissions or access points that certain employees have. That seems so important and just amazing. I think we all think, oh, turn off the email, right? That's probably the only thing that we know
Mm-hmm.
intuitively that we're supposed to turn off. But there's so many other access points that this person would have had with their own passwords, maybe even too. Access to the American Express, like just
Yeah.
whatever. I'm starting to go through a list in my mind of just different things that people have had access to, and it's a little bit scary. Um, so what about remote work, which is so prevalent, obviously, that has to have changed risk and sort of the risk environment for organizations. What does that look like to you?
Yeah, definitely. I think the pandemic sped up a lot of that remote work that we saw about well, I guess 6 years now ago. Feels like it's forever.
Yeah.
Um, when you have people working remotely, the the balance of security changes a little bit because you're no longer in a controlled environment, right? You're not in an office with probably at least some level of physical security that you control, right? Some level of network access that maybe your organization controls. Maybe doesn't. Kind of depends on the size, right? I work from home. My home address here, my home office is where I work. I connect to my work through a VPN, virtual private network, and that's how I make sure that my data is secure. So, depending on how things work within the organization, things like VPNs are important. I will say the biggest positive impact, I should say, coming out of the pandemic was the rise of MFA, multi-factor authentication. There were a lot of security people who were like, oh my gosh, everybody's going to start working from home next week. And they were not prepared to have the appropriate security controls in place, meaning just an ID and a password. And I will tell you, if you're only using an ID and password today for your systems, you're way behind and you are at the gravest risk possible. The minimum level of
Good.
security, I would say, is get
Don't
MFA put in
sugarcoat it,
place.
Jeff.
Look, this is my PSA to all my fellows in the nonprofit area and anyone else who's listening. Get MFA in place. It is the single most important and the most effective thing you can do for account security. Even if you steal my ID and password, you get that text message, you get that notification on your phone to say, "Hey, is this really Jeff? Click here," right? Or number match. There's a bunch of different options out
Well,
there.
yeah, or even better, what's the code that you have to enter? And if you can't
Exactly.
enter that code, you don't get
Yep.
access, right? That's just
Yep.
so important. Yeah.
Yeah, because if I'm an attacker, I'm collecting IDs and passwords like, Thanos and his gems on his Infinity Gauntlet. Like I
Good.
know the passwords. If you reused your password somewhere else, now I know your password to that system as well. And so
Yeah.
it's very trivial for me to, breach an enterprise, or any size organization if you're only using MFA. I mean, sorry,
Yeah.
if you're not using MFA and only using ID and a password.
Yeah. Well, what about cloud-based systems?
Mhm.
And let me ask you this because it's on the cloud too. What do you make of all of these password protectors? Like the ones that are aggregating all of your passwords online. It seems to me that that creates a potential vulnerability right there because then you all of a sudden have just one password for 1,000 passwords. Like it boggles the mind sometimes when I think, oh, so now I feel secure because I've given you one password to access all my life. Anyway, I shouldn't get so exercised about this. Go ahead.
No, you are definitely exercising the right muscle there. It is absolutely something to be thinking about. So, password managers, there's a bunch of them out there. LastPass, 1Password, Bitwarden, right? A bunch of things like that, right? Apple and iCloud, the keychain, right, on your phone. On Android has the same type of thing, right? Windows has something similar. Mac OS, right, is also iCloud keychain. They all do the same thing, right? They collect your credentials to make it easy for you to log in. Hey, instead of typing your ID and password, just do that. My viewpoint on password managers has changed over the last few years. I used to think kind of the same thing. It's like, well, why do I put all my passwords in there? Like that seems like it's a honeypot that once that's stolen, like
Honey
everything's
pot,
gone, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So, now we're in a state where if you're reusing passwords, that's bad, which means now I have to remember 100, 1,000. The last time I checked, last time I checked my password manager, I had like 1,000 accounts in there.
Yeah,
I
right.
probably
I'm
only
there.
use like
I'm running. I'm
50.
getting there. I'm getting there.
Right. Yeah. So you got a bunch of stuff. But is it realistic for a human being to remember 1,000 different passwords, 50 different passwords? No. You need something to protect that. So, yes, I use a password manager. What I do is I make sure that my password manager is ultra secure, a very long password that I only use for that system, a unique username, and absolutely the strongest form of multi-factor authentication I can get. A push notification with number matching, right, things like that, to make sure that that's secure. And then my good hygiene extends to all my other different systems. I'm using different passwords for all my different applications. And so if one account were to get breached, I don't have to sit there and say, oh my gosh, I got to go change that password everywhere else. It's just one account. And so,
Yeah.
okay, that got breached. It will happen because no fault of my own. It could be the vendor, right? Has poor security or they got tripped up somehow.
Yeah.
It limits again. It's like a submarine, right? You have flooding, you close the door and you compartmentalize the parts off and you try to contain again that blast radius.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it true in a danger and a reality where you have a bookkeeper, for example, or other individuals that you trust, but they're also, sharing your credentials or they're accessing your systems because sometimes the people that you're trying to pay or your other people they don't allow for you to have these, I don't know what you would call them, like third party known payees or bookkeepers that do the work for you from that standpoint. Like I just don't even know how to keep yourself safe from the situation where you're not directly paying the bills, but someone in your business is on behalf of the organization, and the vendors don't allow for that kind of like identified person to be able to access the account. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It actually mirrors something that we do here. For my my situation is I have a bookkeeper that I just hired in January. Like I got tired doing the books myself, and I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I wasn't doing it right. I need help, so
Oh,
let me find someone,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
So I onboarded them as a member of our organization. They have a at IDAC podcast email address, and so they are a member of our organization, and I have them set up in our financial systems as delegate authority to say, okay, here's what this role can do. They are a bookkeeper role, and this is what they're authorized to do: move money, pay bills, right, all that kind of stuff, make sure it. But they're using their own credentials. I'm not sharing my credentials with them, so I know exactly who did what in my systems. That's again goes back to the integrity and the audit of saying, okay, well, who performed this transaction? Whether the transaction was manually writing something in a paper book or doing a transaction online, SaaS tool, whatever it may be, to say, hey, I booked this incoming thing or I sent this outgoing, payment, whatever it may be. So I would say if you're in a situation where you are sharing an account, that's no bueno. You should probably look at getting them their own account or figuring out an alternate path where you're not sharing a credential. Ideally, you'll spin up another Office 365 or Google Workspace account for them and have them, be a little more legitimate in the eyes of some of these other vendors that might shy because it's a risk for them too, right? They say, oh, well, what is this Gmail account that is, access to financial? That doesn't look right. That doesn't smack of, proper security and risk reduction.
Right.
So, there's an option there to do that. And those are relatively low cost to spin up, just a basic email address and get them set up that way.
Yeah, yeah. I have this sense that what we're sharing is just going to make nonprofit leaders completely fearful
Well, I
and
hope not.
feel, yeah. Well, I just think it's a lot. It's overwhelming, but yet, it's all manageable as I think you would share. It doesn't require tens of thousands, if not millions of dollars to protect your organization properly. But I would just, what's your advice for nonprofit listeners listening today who feel overwhelmed? Like what should they do? Where should they begin? What advice would you give?
I think the most important thing, and this is hard for everybody to do, is ask for help. You do not have to do everything yourself. There are plenty of people who have gone before you and figure that out. Tap into your network, ask questions, right? This is a good one. Talk amongst your peers, right, with this group. The other one is you do not have to solve everything all at once. Think about it from where is the most risk going to come from? Again, you start off with let's solve this one other thing. If you do not have MFA in place, multi-factor authentication in place today, that should be one of your first steps. Go and turn it on in your account. Turn it on in your employees and your, other people that you have direct control over their accounts. Make sure they have it turned on and have it set up appropriately. If you don't know how to do it, ask for help, right? It's a relatively simple thing to kind of get configured and going. A large organization, might struggle with a little bit more because now you're changing people's behaviors, but that is where I would start is take a look at your basic security measures and then just start making a list. Hey, what are the things that we need to start checking through? You're not going to be able to do everything at once. I've been doing this for a long time. No company I've ever come across has ever said, okay, here's all the things we need to do, and boom, they're done the next year. Like it is always a roadmap. And so you have to plan out where your most risk is and just, eat that cake one bite at a time.
Yeah, you mentioned the inventory, which I think is
Mhm.
incredibly important. Documentation of all the different things in the password on where things are and who has access, all of those. You mentioned the incident response plan. Is there anything leaders should know about like creating one, what that looks like, what incidents they're trying to plan for? Like any advice on that one?
Yeah, start one up. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be fancy. It's really just sit there and role play. What happens if? And so think about,
Well,
what are the scenarios that you think you're at the most risk for? I would say everyone's at risk of ransomware. So, maybe start there and say, okay, well, what happens if all of a sudden our computers don't work and we have a message on the screen that says you're locked out, pay us. Okay, what do you do? Get the people in the room, start thinking about it. Again, you don't want to
Right.
be figuring that out when something bad is actually happening. I
Yeah.
know we shared a bunch of information when we did the huddle, so I'm sure you can kind of broadcast it out. There's like a template there for instant response, but
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. You have tools. RSM has tools that would be helpful. How can they access that? Where should they go to get that if they're looking for the incident report kind of guidelines or whatnot?
yeah, visit us at rsmus.com or rsm.com. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to direct you to the right resources. If you buy me a piece of chocolate cake, I'm happy to come out and say, hey, let's talk through this, right? I can be
Chocolate
bribed with
cake.
sweets. There is a lot of information out there. We talk an awful lot about AI and sort of the dangers around it. This is an action area where AI is helpful. Use those types of tools to say, hey, I need to create a plan for my organization, help me think through this. Now, you want to make sure you have some level of expertise to kind of understand what it's putting together, right? Don't just trust it at face value, but there's options there. But look, I'm an open book. You know, I would say hit me up on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Yeah.
Reach out to RSM, the day job, and I'm happy to direct you to the right spots or just give you, some hopefully good advice.
Yeah, we shared out the materials that you made available to us with our members, and they were extremely helpful. So I hope people that are listening do reach out to you to try to get access to some of those tools. But you're right, you call the experts. I love the fact that you can use AI to like identify the top 50 vulnerabilities of
Mhm.
nonprofits in the cybersecurity space, right? And or whatever it is. So you can immediately get ideas of how you can start protecting yourself. And I think I don't know of a single nonprofit, to your point earlier, but I don't know a single organization. I don't know a single nonprofit that's kind of gathered their leadership together or staff together to brainstorm cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And probably not enough organizations have really done a good job about training their staff or making them prepared for what they might see out there and what they should try to avoid. Like, I think sometimes those clicking, links are just so tempting.
Mhm.
How could it not be? I know this person, I know this organization, I know, so like I'm gonna click it. Too late, all that stuff. So education seems like it would be really important.
It's
I
hugely
don't,
important.
Yeah.
It's still the best value for money that you can get is to educate and train your employees. Dollar for
Yeah.
dollar, educational awareness training around cybersecurity is the most important thing you do. And you can't just do it once. You have to reinforce it
Good.
because look, we're all humans, we will slip up. And so we occasionally need the reminder, say, oh, how do I do that? And there's ways to do that. There's certainly services out there that will kind of try to trick your employees. I hate to say it that way, but that's the way it works is say, hey, you fell for a phishing scam, be more vigilant next time. And so, it kind of keeps your employees on your toes and stuff like that. So I see a lot of organizations that have adopted that sort of scenario where it's like, hey, we've gone through training. Just FYI, we're going to be randomly sending these things and you're going to get emails that look like they might be legit. What we need you, employee, is to be vigilant. You are our best line of defense is don't click on things that look weird. Validate before you click on things. If you click on something, immediately notify somebody so that the right teams can get involved, right, to call for help and stuff like that. So
Yep.
absolutely, awareness and training are extremely important, and they will continue to be so.
Excellent. Great advice. Um, like what concerns you over the next 4 to 5 years most when it comes to this arena of cybersecurity and the digital world?
I think AI is probably the big one that's kind of out there. It's going to be used for good. It's also going to be used for bad. It is a tool like any other. It is accelerating how quickly bad guys can do things. But at the same time, it's also accelerating the good things that people can do with it to protect against that kind of stuff. So I would say keep an eye on it. You can't just stick your head in the sand and be like, okay, well, this is just a fad. It's going to go away. No, I think it's here to stay. And so you need to understand how it works. You need to understand how your employees and your organization is using it. If your employees or your organization is putting data into a commercial artificial intelligence system like an OpenAI, like a Claude or a Gemini from Google, if they are the commercial versions that are out there for everybody, that data is now somewhere in a system. You may or may not want that to be there. So I would look at what are your policies from an AI usage perspective. If it's something that is critical to the organization, you should probably look at setting up your own internal sort of enterprise version. And all these AI providers, I'd say the big three, have their own versions of that, right? ChatGPT for business, Microsoft has Copilot, Claude for enterprise on the Anthropic side. Same thing for Google, right? With the Google Workspace, the nonprofit stuff has Gemini stuff built in. So I would look at where you're sending your data.
Yep.
We are not too far away where the audio visual aspect of AI will also become very, very tricky to deal with. How do you know this is really me and not an AI version of me that someone else is
I just assumed
impersonating me with?
I just assumed I was interviewing an AI agent.
I
That's
sound
not
like AI,
really
maybe.
Jeff. You mean you're not on the beach sipping pina colada right now, and you're using your AI agent to sort of do all your work?
I'll never tell.
It's good.
But I would look about that. Like that's, this is science fiction. Remember the first Mission Impossible, right? Ethan Hunt puts on the mask and it looks like it's
Yeah.
John Voight, right? Oh,
Right.
that's crazy. That's easy now. We all have the apps to do that on our phones, on our computers. And so, there was a story, I think it was late 2025. There was a bank in Asia that got hit for, I think it was $25 million. This poor accountant or financial person joined a call that had a whole bunch of board members on it. And every single person in that call was an AI generated individual. And they took this company, they tricked basically this person, say, send money to this account, blah, blah, blah. Now, that's a very specific and targeted attack. That took a
Wow.
lot of resources and know how to do it.
Science fiction come to life.
Just like seatbelts used to be a luxury item. Guess what? Everybody has them now. I think the same thing's going to happen with some of these more advanced AI capabilities that are advanced now that will become very easy to use.
Yeah, yeah. Instead of Ralph Nader, unsafe at any speed, it's sort of I don't know, Jeff Steadman, unsafe at any speed, digital edition.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
You just got to be pay
Uh,
attention and just kind of think through things.
yeah, no, it's great advice. And is there a mindset shift that you think nonprofit leaders need to adopt regarding digital stewardship? I mean, is there something that you think nonprofit leaders just need to turn on in their brain related to this space?
I think I would love to see more board members, especially as I kind of talk with those kind of folks a lot in my work, is to be more cognizant of the risks that are coming through. I think there is a lot of, well, we saw this dashboard and it said all green, so I guess everything's good. I would encourage people to ask questions. Why is this green? What are we doing? How do you tell me how you think this is green? If something's red, absolutely figure out, okay, what you're going to do to fix it, right? But especially I think at the senior levels, there is this, sometimes this idea of like, okay, well, Jeff's got it and I trust him and we're good. Trust but validate. Call me, ask me questions, right? As the person that's supposed to be responsible, but make sure you've got a good, comfortable relationship with those folks. But I would definitely start asking people to challenge dashboards is probably the biggest way I would put it.
What challenge dashboards? Like, explain that just for a second.
Yeah, so if I show, let's say I'm presenting to the board and I say, okay, here's our stance on cybersecurity for this quarter or month or whatever my cadence is, right? I'm probably going to show you a bunch of information around, oh, look, here's all the things we stopped. Everything is green, right, from a dashboard perspective, and it
Okay.
looks
Okay.
good.
Okay.
Okay, let me, can you explain this, a little bit more? Ask those questions. Again, you don't have to be the expert. What you do need to be good at, though, is asking questions. And, you probably have to do a little bit of education, right, to kind of catch up to speed. But I think that's where, most people that are in this role are happy to educate. Like, we want you to understand what we're doing. And I enjoy explaining things to people and say, hey, this is why this is important. And here's the questions you should be asking. Just like we're having this conversation now, that's the type of questions you should be asking, your staff, especially if you've delegated to them some sort of responsibility from a security standpoint.
Good. Yeah. Okay. So if I'm a board member, and most nonprofit executives are on boards, nonprofit boards themselves.
Mhm.
If I'm that board member, what is one conversation, like with the board, with my fellow board members that I should be prioritizing right now, or with the executive team? What's one conversation I should be prioritizing right now with them?
I think I would understand where the risks are and what does your inventory look like. So
Mhm.
if you don't have an inventory, ask that question. Hey, what can we do about putting together our list of things? Our
And nine
people,
times out of 10, it's probably a leading question, right? It's
probably, yeah.
rhetorical. It's rhetorical. It's like,
Yeah, and look, it's hard. It's hard work, right? It doesn't matter how big the organization is. Think about your own self. Like, how would you inventory all the things you've got? And so you need to think about it from a risk
I
perspective.
don't. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, as you're going through this conversation, I'm thinking what a failure I've been just personally,
No, I,
and
I definitely look, it's hard. This is why you ask for help. Nobody can do this alone. Doesn't matter how big you are or how big your budget is. I've encountered one organization in my lifetime of consulting here that I've done over the last decade that has an unlimited security budget, literally unlimited. They have carte blanche to spend as much money as they want, as long as it serves a security purpose. Even that organization still struggles with trying to keep up. Do we know who all our people are? Do we know what all the systems are being used? Right? It's that inventory is going to be very helpful, and the more complete you can get it, the lower the risk. It will never go to zero.
yeah,
But if you have no idea, start somewhere.
it's great.
Draft it in your notes app on your phone if you're a smaller shop. Sit down or maybe delegate to someone. Maybe if you're lucky enough to have like interns come in, give them a task, right? Like that. Say, hey, go and interview the business or the other stakeholders and say, hey, what are the systems you're using? We just want to get a handle. What do we have? I'll bet you would find a bunch of systems that you had no idea about. And you're probably maybe even spending money for things like, yeah, why am I spending for both Zoom and Microsoft Teams? Or like, there's all kinds of, we call it shadow IT sort of in the business. There's a
Yeah,
bunch of that
yeah,
shadow stuff that takes place.
yeah, yeah. So you might end up saving some money and some future headaches too, right?
Hmm.
Great, amazing. So last question. What final advice, and I know there's no such thing as final advice because in your world there's always a new interesting challenge around the corner, but what final advice would you leave nonprofit leaders um, with regarding this fiduciary duty in this age?
Um, I would think about the mission. What is it you're doing, right? We're all nonprofit people. We all have a mission that we're trying to accomplish. Is what you're doing in support of that mission? And are you taking care of it? Right. So that means, of course, cybersecurity, but it means anything to do with making sure that whatever it is, whatever cause, whatever purpose you're doing, that you're protecting that. Whether it's people that you're protecting, right, out as part of your mission, or if it's other things, remember the mission. What are you trying to do? And take it back to that. How am I protecting that mission?
Yeah, right. You buy insurance on the buildings, you
Mhm.
buy insurance on
Yeah.
the
And
work
put
that
MFA in front of everything. That's my
yeah, yeah,
practical
yeah,
one.
yeah.
But think about the risk. Yeah.
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
protect people?
That's good. That's good. I like the so do a lot of deep thinking,
Yep.
but then put MFA
And
in front.
then log in accounts, settings, MFA, enable. There. Now Jeff's a little bit happier with you.
If you're going to start anywhere, start with MFA,
Absolutely.
right? Words to live by. I love it. I love it. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for the incredibly valuable conversation we've had today. Big takeaways, protecting systems is ultimately about protecting the mission, protecting trust, and protecting the communities your organizations out there serve. And cybersecurity and digital governance are no longer side conversations. They're leadership responsibilities. And thank you for sharing your expertise and offering such great help out there to nonprofit leaders so that they can better understand the realities of operating in today's digital environment. Thank you all for joining this conversation on the Nonprofit Edge podcast. If today's conversation was valuable to you, please do share the episode with a colleague, executive leader, board member, friend. Like and subscribe to it. Check out our other two podcasts, the Nonprofit Mastering Fundraising one and Lead for Good, the other. And, if you're looking for a community of nonprofit leaders committed to learning, growth, and thoughtful leadership, certainly visit Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership. And as I always do, I just encourage you all to continue to lead for good. Thanks for joining and see you soon. Bye all.
Thank you for joining us for the Nonprofit Edge, a podcast series to promote purpose in practice. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and learned some important lessons from our featured expert. We always want our content to be informative and to position nonprofit leaders to succeed. Please join us again for our next podcast. In the meantime, we wish you all the best and encourage you to learn more about Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership by visiting our website at www.fulcrumleader.com.